Everybody, and welcome back to Painters Motivating Painters Reviews. This is our video for May 2023. For any new viewers, Painting Motivating Painters is a Facebook group where people team up to share hobby hints and encouragement. And as part of that, we have monthly review videos where people can submit pictures of their models for feedback. If you'd like to join the group, we'd love to have you. And if you want to submit for the next month, just look for the events book on the events page on Facebook. We have a few more submissions than usual this month, no doubt thanks to our good friend Kieran. So we'll like to try to keep everything clear and concise for this video so it doesn't get like super long. Just on that note, if you are new to the group, please make sure to submit your entries into the events page rather than the chat, and only make one submission per month, as otherwise we'll just, if there's a double submission, we'll just skip over it, but it just messes up our rhythm a little bit. So before, we'll just kick right into it. We have a trio of cyberpunk busts for some reason, and I'm going to start off with Sam Ryan Tubmans. So we have this kind of punk guy with his glowy sword on his back of his head. Looks a little bit like something from Final Fantasy as well. No specific feedback, so just it's a nice piece. I like the way you got your blue, red, and your green there. Nice freehand on the t-shirt, giving it a bit of character. The orange lenses on the glasses are also very good. And it's definitely got that kind of cyberpunk feel to everything from it. Obviously, the elephant in the room here is the OSL, the object source sliding from the blade. I think if you look at the reverse of the model, if you look at the back of it, I think it looks really cool. It's got this super, like, he's completely blown out. He's got this neon blue sword thing that's lighting him up from above. And then from the front, he looks grand as well. It's very nicely painted, but kind of where they intersect, it looks quite odd. Because basically your problem is that he's from the rear view it looks like it's like nighttime and the only light source is that sword, but from the front he's obviously like perfectly well lit and it's daytime. And then say like the top of his right arm where the blue light is hitting it is darker, even though that part should be like lit by the sun and by the sword and therefore would be brighter. So you need, what you do when you have a piece like this, you need to have basically, if you're doing two light sources, say he's like in an alley and like the sunlight is shining in and it's dark behind him, you need to show that it goes to like full dark somewhere and then goes up to the blue in the back where the blue is the main light source there. So that would be one of the main things. I also think that some of the locations that you have the object source lighting on are a bit iffy, like on the sides of his face. Like if the sword is behind his head, it can't cast light onto the sides of his face because it'd have to go through his head to do that. And I like what you've done with kind of shadows from his collar and things, but we can see like in some places the light kind of has gone through like his collar to get onto the side of his jaw and stuff. But just generally, like the side of his face shouldn't be so dark. It should be the same color as the front of it. It's being lit with the same light as the front. I think you've just kind of have the light wrapping around him a little bit too much. Yeah, I think it's very well rendered. I think the OSL looks really well in the back area. You just have to make sure that you have the kind of shadow zone in between the two different light sources. If you're doing this in future, I think you definitely it's a nice shot at it though. Jim?
Yeah, very much agree. Like, there's some elements of the OSL that do work well, like on this bit of the hand here. I think that sells pretty well. But in general, I think the sword needs to be an awful lot brighter. Like, the cast light cannot be as bright as the source of the light, and they are pretty much the same. So, like, next time, really push the brightness on the sword. Other than what Matt said already, just a little bit of cleanliness in the recesses. Like, it's cool that you've used like these like purplish tones in the skin, but they just look a little bit of a sharp transition in some cases. And then it's just like a case of just smoothing out blends, really. I love what you did with this smoke. I think that's rendered really well, including the glow on that. That looks cool. And like the cigarette end as well in the smokes rendered nicely as well. So yeah, great stuff on all that stuff, Sam. Thanks very much for submitting. People are probably going to have to bear with me a bit here because my Facebook has decided to shit itself once again. Thank you. And it's locked onto these pictures and I can't close them. So let me just go ahead and refresh it and hopefully we can get to the next one in just a sec. It won't let me do it. Oh, Facebook, you do bring me so much joy. All right, let me just back out of it. I'm gonna have to completely restart Facebook right now. Talk amongst yourself, just a mo. Oh no, Facebook has been spelt wrong. That's my bad. I can spell, I promise. So smooth. There we go. Come on. It was weird. It was like this, you know, where the picture close button is. It just wasn't there. It was like locked in a load of blown up text that shouldn't even have been there. So I couldn't get to it. And refreshing the page or pressing back was just taking me back to the same photos we just looked at. So this will be fun for somebody to skip through. Wow. And I'm now halfway through loading the pictures. No, I'm not taking any work during commentary on anything in the near future, so don't worry about that. Right, next one. Sorry about that. So cheers, Sam. And next is Tom Pike. So this is the first bust I've painted. First bust I painted as well, actually, as a matter of fact. Pushed the boat out and tried to do side lighting rather than zenithal. Not sure I pushed it hard enough or made the piece interesting enough with all the skin. And as wise men have once said, if you think you're right about something, then you are. And in this case, I think you'd agree. You could definitely push the lighting thing further. You have got some nice tones in the skin and textures and colours in the cloth. And you've done a nice job of not going too far. I know that some of these recesses, like on her face and some of these hexagonal things, they're actually quite shallow and easy to block out with too much paint. So you could definitely do with a lot more lighting in the hair. You could push that an awful lot further and push the shadows as well. When you're doing like really interesting lighting scenes, it's as much about painting the shadows in as it is painting the highlights in. So you have to push the contrast down as well as up. And that's kind of across the whole thing. I think the skin is best, but you could definitely push everything further. Like you've picked out the textures quite nicely in the blue fabric. I think that's like you've got quite a nice travel there, like between the highest value and the lowest value. There's good travel in there. You could probably broaden the midtone out a little bit. But like the hair is very samey, the skin is less so, but still there is a lot of space to go for with your values. So yeah, whichever directionality you were going for the light, it looks like the light sort of coming in from like 3 p.m, like from the right side. But yeah, you've just got to push it further to really sell it. It still looks like a very uniformly lit scenario that she's in. Another opportunity for this cool thing, if you can be enticed to do so, is these things look quite cool if they're like glowy energy orb type things. So yeah, little opportunity as well for you there. So yeah, I hope that helps, Tom. So over to you, Alex.
Yeah, so again, you know, like Jim said, if you think you've not got enough contrast, the answer is more contrast is always more contrast. Even when you think you've got enough contrast, a lot of the time the answer is more contrast. So we could definitely push that. At first glance, obviously when enlarging the photos, you can see that it is an intended side light. But on very first glance, when it was sort of the zoomed out form, um, I couldn't really tell that there was too much directionality in there, and that does come from, as Jim said, not pushing the shadows far enough as well as the highlights. I think that where you're talking about it maybe not being as sort of having as much interest, um, with all the skin. A lot of these I think this model is often painted with a lot of some of those sections of skin as sort of metallic elements to break things up, or different coloured, sort of synthetic, not necessarily full non-metallic chrome reflective metal, but sort of almost like sort of space marine armor type, slightly non-metallic-y, metally, but not quite metal, which can help to break that up. Or again, breaking up skin tones can be in tattooing and things like that as well. I think the hair is definitely needs more of that contrast. It doesn't really look like hair at the moment. In terms of hair is very very shiny. It's a very very reflective material. So you want to go with specular highlights, bringing it up quite close to white, quite dark in places as well, close to black, like you would for non-metallics. But I think it's really cleanly painted. It's really sort of everything is in quite tight. in terms of cleanliness, in terms of brush control. So the color tones in the skin tone are really, really nice. So just pushing the contrast up and in different areas as well. Your highest value on the chest is the same as the highest value on the face. In fact, I think the face has got darker values than places that should be darker. So you just moving where that balance and range of contrast is across the model can just help to bring focus in, as well as just giving it a little bit more direction, a bit more sort of snap into whatever your focal point is. But yeah, really, really nice sort of tones there, and just moving in a really good direction. Busts are hard, especially the first one. No one expects to get a bust perfect their first time. But yeah, really, really nice. Then we move up to Singe and Scott. So first piece, sort of extensive NMM, creating warm, cold contrasts, and aiming for a more realistic, minimalist face for lighting and skin tone. Sort of saying about wanting to create layers of contrast, light, texture, color, temperature, which is definitely something that's really good to do. As I have said loads before in these, it's something that I really strongly believe in is contrast range across the model as well. Ooh, that's video. So I think the skin tone itself is really, really nice. On that sort of left side of her face shadow is really natural, really, really soft. It works really well in that sort of artistic, illustrative sense. So I really, really like that. I just wanted to highlight that straight away. The blending there is really smooth as well. I think you could potentially get away with more contrast. Sort of darker skin tones in general, because skin itself as a material is slightly reflective. It's sort of a satiny material. There is a reflectivity there, and on darker skin tones where you've got the same level of reflectivity but with a darker base tone, essentially, it almost looks more contrasted a lot of the time. So you could get away with a bit more contrast there, but if you're going for that minimalist style, you don't need it. It's very, very smooth and very delicate at the moment. I think the sort of composition is quite nice as well, with those sort of purple tones snapping the attention up to the face really, really well, despite sort of arguably higher values down sort of on the chest with all these metal elements. And the sort of on the reverse side, you've got that glow again at the back, which helps to balance that on the front and back of the model as well, which is something that tends to be overlooked. On the non-metallic itself, it could be non-metallicia, more sort of specular highlights, even in a more minimalist style. We need to push the contrast to solidify that as metal, to differentiate the materials. You were saying that one of the things that you were hoping to look at was a contrast of textures and materials. It's not as strong as it could be. Just to really snap out that shine. Maybe you're going for a slightly duller metal look. That's entirely possible. It just doesn't quite read like that to me fully. But overall, I think it's a really, really nice, really tight piece. Matt?
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous and great work. I think like the way the kind of realism with his face and the more stylized look of the metal, like it's almost unsettling. It looks like it's someone's face has been cut out and put on a robot. And the actual style of the armor really reminds me of Derek Riggs's art for Somewhere in Time. It's an Iron Maiden album. There's a character in it with a robot body, but it looks like it's more kind of, there's almost a contrast in the style of the face being far more kind of realistic, and the other parts are more illustrative, if that makes any sense to you. I'm not sure that's what you're going for. One little note, I think kind of glowing parts where her ear would be on the left hand side. Like Alex said, the way you've done the light in the face is amazing on the left hand side, with the warm kind of lights coming in and shadows. But I think you could have the actual glowing thing be brighter on that side, given that you've told us it's a shadow. Like technically it will be the same level of brightness, but our eyes would adjust to the darkness there, and we'd see the purple light sources being brighter from inside there. And it would just make it more, to just sell it more as a glowing kind of thing, and just kind of add a little pop of interest and help with the shadow feeling on the other side. But it's really good work, and this is super challenging, like to try and get, female skin and have it in a really nice, like look and then have all this NMM everywhere on OSL. So I think it's a really, really good piece and you should be very proud of it. Moving on up, we got Marco Trafoglio doing this Ogroid Myrmidon fella. And I really like the way you've used this kind of limited palette on the figure. You got a mixture of kind of cold and warm purples in the shield, which is awesome. And I think the gold is a great contrast color for that. You have purple and gold obviously go well together. On the textures, I think they look good in a lot of places, but in other places they're a bit too random. Like, so for example, it doesn't kind of suggest any kind of wear or any particular material to me, like just kind of scratches in every direction. Like a leather belt tends to be worn in kind of like lines where it would fold up and then frayed around the edges. And then his bracer on his right arm, like that looks like it could be like wood or something. That there's nothing really telling me what it is. It is very textured, but I'm not sure what that texture is, if that makes sense. So you could be a bit more deliberate in terms of that. And you could look at reference as well. Like if it's meant to be leather, like a leather bracer like that, it's going to be much more worn where it's like touching off his skin and that kind of thing. And it won't be the same as like a strip of leather that would be in a belt. I said probably the largest areas for improvement are in the metals. They need some highlight and some shade to really bring them out a bit more, especially in areas like rivets. You have like a lot of rivets on the shield. You can kind of see that anytime you have there's no kind of shadow under the rivets or a highlight on top, apart from what's there from the cast light, which that kind of kills the scale feeling for the model because basically we can tell that it is reflecting as if it was a small object, whereas you want to show that it is a large object, it would cast a deeper shadow. So you need to kind of add in like a lighter gold or a silver even for a little tiny dot on the tops, and then paint in like a wash kind of consistency of like a red brown or whatever flesh wash was often kind of used for gold just under there. I'd say you've done a wash overall maybe to get the recesses, but you had to be a bit more deliberate about it as well, just to kind of take control of the shadows because the NMM or the TMM, the true metallic metal, I think it's a really good tone and it looks good, but it's not selling the full kind of scale idea of the model. But yeah, I really like what you know with the skin tone, the way you've kind of used the same colors throughout the whole piece, and the tattoo work or like whatever that's meant to be on his shoulder. It looks really good as well. Jim?
Yeah, they're like brands. I think they're actually like
Mm.
stamped in, recessed. So it's good. To me, that sells as like a cool kind of glowy rune type thing. Like there's some sort of mystical, magical power emanating from inside him. Tricky thing to render on this guy. That is quite shallow detail on that, but I think you did a good job. I also like the skin tones and the palette that you've used for it is cool. Personally, maybe I would have gone a little bit of a different color for the straps around his body harness, just because they're just kind of settling a little bit too much together. I get that it's a limited palette and stuff, but I think it would just read better as a different material and help give it that sort of contrast to the piece in general, just to have those in a different colour. Having said that, though, the colours are kind of blown a bit because you can clearly see from your pictures you've lit this from two different angles with two different coloured bulbs or filter papers or something. So like on this one, the chest looks orange, and on this one, the chest is very, very blue. So it is a little bit tricky to review, to be honest. But I think you've done a nice job on it in general. Could maybe increase like the separation, like the definition of elements with thinner, darker lines as well. And then also just possibly, I mean, I did it on mine. I mean, lots of people have done it on theirs. It's like having like, because he's quite a big beast, just to make it a bit more interesting, you could maybe next big beastie you try like a pattern to the skin, or like a two-tone sort of, the lower half is darker, or like his back is like spotted or patterned in some way or something like that, because it does generally just come together as like a big blue clump. But it has been nicely done, so it's not a massive deal on this one because you have done a good job of like structuring the muscles and stuff, so you have done a very good job overall. So yeah, nice one, Marco, thank you very much. I will now struggle with my Facebook again, bear with. Basically, I'm having to use the back button now and go through my history to get back to the actual events page, so do bear with. Right, so Justin, this was a duplicate entry, wasn't it? This one, being as this is the first one, we'll do this one, but when we get later up, we're just going to skip over it, okay? So he hasn't officially painted any competition pieces yet, as I don't think he's at that level. Depends which competition you enter and what day. As it was first time, doesn't matter. But here's a few pieces from my army that took second place. And first place judges voting along for comp. See? Exactly. So there you go. I thought this looked really cool. Congratulations on all that. These look great. I love how you've given it kind of a grimdarky sort of style to it, but you've still kept the models quite bright. A lot of people think grimdark means dull, and it doesn't necessarily. It can mean lots of different things to lots of different people, but generally it's kind of war-torn, battle damaged, old, grimy, but that doesn't mean the paint job has to be dull at all, which I don't think yours is. I thought that in general, though, across all of them, because you didn't ask for like one in particular, and there's too many to do all of them, but like in general, across the whole lot, a little bit more separation. So that's to say like dark lines between panels, and like where two materials meet, just to symbolize that occlusion shadow that you get between two materials. And also edge highlights on stuff seems to be a little bit light. Excuse the pun. These guys look good. And then also painting of tufts, like you haven't painted any of the tufts at all. So give them a dry brush, just with, because the thing is everything else is painted, but we all know that tufts look like this out of the box. So we know they're not painted. They're just like from a different pack or whatever. So you can always go in with washes. Watch out for the gloss ones though, because they get really sticky and can mess up the shape of them big time. So don't use gloss ones. And dry brushing of them is a good way to get some variation in them. I do it when they're still on the pad. Don't stick them on and then dry brush them because it's a pain in the bum, makes a mess. Do it when it's still on the pad and then just transfer it over. But in general, I think you did a great job on a lot of this. I love the gory bases where you've got gory bases. That's cool. This green one was a bit of a strange one though. It kind of looked unfinished, because you've just got like the plain base, then you've got rock and you've got the skull and it's all green. So I'm not sure what's going on with this guy, but yeah, the basing on this, I've forgotten what this swamp fiend thing, I think it might be a swamp fiend, something like that. But I think you did obviously the best job on that. He's clearly like the central focal piece of it. You did a great job with like the glowing effect on it. I think that's selling quite well. You could maybe put a few more like shadowy areas where the glow cast finishes and then the normal color begins. It looks a little bit washed out towards the outside edge. But in general, like for army, like for table, I think it looks really great. So yeah, nice one, Justin. Who's after me? Alex, isn't it?
Yeah. So, as said, it's quite a few pieces. So a few too many to go through. Sort of each one in detail. But sort of bring a few broad strokes. Like Jim said, separation is a major thing that I think is not as present as it should be. Particularly on I don't know factions, so I'm going to say the metal space marine type dudes. Chaos thing? I don't know.
These are chaos, I can confirm.
They're because they are more because it's done in those metals. It's more or less one. I know you've got the brass and the sort of more irony, sort of slightly dull silver tone, but because it's true metallic as well, it's reflecting the ambient light all from in the same spot. So you're pretty much getting essentially if one highlight, if you in that sort of physics kind of way of model the thing as just a sphere, you've got that one directional highlight from the ambient, so you're not really seeing any of the details. Obviously in the hand in person it would be a little bit clearer in the separation, but certainly in the photo you don't get many of the details. So just the separation there, it's just where it really stood out to me. Your big guy with his big with the glowing arm weapon things. Like I say, total Warhammer lore expert here. The separation is a lot clearer there because you've got all these different tones and colors working through. I actually think that's a really nice piece. It looks really, really cleanly painted. I think because it's so large, it's easier to get that separation through a little bit more clearly. I really like the glow as well. I think it genuinely looks hot. I think there's a few places where the light of the glow is reaching where it wouldn't, but you can, because it looks quite well executed. You can, and it's quite a hot color, sort of that orangey red glow. You can kind of get away with that as more emanating heat than anything else. I think that looks really, really nice. The other thing for me, sort of across the board, is the bases. When you've got this sort of, because you've got a very, very sort of grim, darky, quite desaturated, sort of neutral tone color scheme running throughout, but then you've got these really quite bright saturated colors, so sort of reds and magentas and sort of pinks and yellows in the bases. It kind of draws the attention all the way down and sort of doesn't allow for the focus to be on the model itself. So that would be toning that down or balancing it somewhere else on the model. Keeping it in that desaturated grim darky style. Your best bet is probably going to be either do a spot color, sort of Sin City style, somewhere on the model to bring the focus up, or toning down quite how bright and saturated the bases are, or a little bit of both, to sort of balance that out. But overall, I think they're definitely sort of moving towards, you're saying it's sort of not feeling like you're at level to paint for competition. They're definitely moving towards that higher end of the spectrum when it comes to obviously they're different competitions have different levels and things. So I feel like I'd be okay in a local competition, but in a big major one, then I'd not even want to walk through the door. But they're nice pieces. They're cleanly painted. They're well painted. They've got interest. It's just tidying up a few of the loose ends, so to speak, in pushing them to that next level. Then moving up to Jordan T. Lawson. First proper full effort paint job. Always fun to have a sort of push all the way through, see what you can do if you just ignore any sort of time constraints and just push. I think this has turned out really well for that. It's really, really cleanly painted, really nice, sort of in that heavy metal style. I think that the cleanliness is the standout thing, how crisp the lines are and things, where you've got the separation is quite clear. A lot of the transitions are more subtle in terms of the blending. Again, that fits in with that Games Workshop style. But it is very, very cleanly done. You don't always need super, super, super high contrast across the model at all if you then implement it in other ways. The cloak doesn't have, if we're looking at the back, doesn't have huge range of contrast across it, but you've got these extreme edge highlights and things. I think which kind of it leans into that Games Workshop style. If you look at the box arts, a lot of the time they don't have huge contrast anywhere except the edges. All the contrast is focused in on the edges. So leaning into that works really, really well, especially for Games Workshop models. It's almost as though they were designed for that style of painting. I think though you've maybe gone a little bit too heavy on some of the edge highlights. Things like the tears on the cape or cloak rather. It's going to catch light at the bottom, but you're not going to catch light on those top edges because there's no, you've not got the lights from above, not from below. So highlighting it all the way around makes it look a little bit unnatural to the eye. Just overall, I think that, moving potentially out of that Games Workshop style, just to experiment with it, might sort of look at a slightly more natural style and maybe a few pieces down the line, and then if you prefer this, go back to it, but you'll learn lessons that you can take in, things like that sort of choosing where the edge highlights are best placed. But overall, I think it's really nice, it's really clean. I think that the composition and the colour palette are quite nice as well, with the red sort of balanced out, top and bottom across, sort of creating that nice sort of diagonal line, cutting through the figure is always nice. and the sort of the actual, I mean, the model does well with the way that it's been sculpted, that you can create all these nice directions through the colors that you then choose to implement. But it is a really nice piece. Matt?
Yeah, it's beautiful looking. You did a really good job in the face. It looks very like kind of real, kind of natural looking in there, and it's kind of like focal as well because you've got all the black armor. And it's cute. It's all extremely cleanly painted. There's a few little kind of compositional notes I had. So like in the back view, you've got all these holes going through the cloak. I'm not 100% sure why they're like red on the inside. I get that the inside lining of the cloak is red, but I assume that those holes are meant to have punched the whole way through, but they just aren't sculpted going the whole way through. So I suppose it could be showing the internal lining, but it's just a little bit weird in a couple of places. Um, Whatever your headcanon is, I'm sure it's fine. And then his bolter shells, you've got this kind of brass color, but it looks a little bit rusted. I don't know if you used a non-metallic paint for that or whatever, but I don't know if that's intentional or not. It's super minor though, who cares? And the base, like the steel of the base, is very similar to the armor of the model. Like his foot almost looks like it's hard to tell where one ends and the other one begins from the main picture. So you might want to just change it up a little bit more. If you're doing this for like an army or whatever, to have the base be lighter or darker, or you can even strategically have rust around his foot on the base so that you just get a transition there in between them. To make it a little bit more clear where one ends and the other one begins. But it's super well painted, so great job. Then moving up, we've got another Space Marine. First Dark Angel Marine, but a while. See how you improve it. Okay, I'm not 100% sure now, John, like what kind of level you're going for on this, so it'd be nice to know that. But I'm just gonna kind of give you general feedback based on what it looks like you can do and what you haven't done. First of all, I absolutely love your base. It looks like it is watercress. Like, is it actually watercress that you grew and then put on the base, or is it some product that looks identical to watercress? But it's great, whatever way it is. I think the texture on the armor is really nice. The armor in general is really nice. It's got a great gamut of color. It's got like a long, wide range of values, and you've also got kind of good tones as well, with the red in the shadows and the kind of more yellowish tones in the highlights. It's great. It's a good way of doing this kind of like dark angels. They don't have to be like just dark green to light green. It looks way better than kind of a very standard look for it. Um, Couple areas for improvement would be especially around his face. Like he looks quite Ken dollish, if that makes sense to you. It's all his skin is all very much one color, and kind of plasticky looking, and the hair as well doesn't have any. It looks like it's black plastic, like a Ken doll, or Action Man, if you prefer. It's cleanly applied and all that, but it could have, you either need to kind of add highlights with, say, like some very light dry brushing of a grey, or you could give him like a streak of grey through his hair just to break it up a bit more, because it just being solid black kind of makes it look more like a toy or what have you. And with the skin, you could have a lot more tones, like very faint blue and red washes can just kind of bring out a lot of kind of make the skin pop a bit more. As well as that, what do I want to say? The chainsword looks good. It's got a lot of kind of flat area there. You could have some hazard stripes or something up along the sides of the blade, or the flat bit, or some sort of freehand or whatever if you wanted to, depending again on what kind of standard you're going for. And then the transfer on the shoulder, the like sword with the wings, it's obviously put on afterwards, and it's not painted to have the same kind of light and shadows on it as everything else. So you can see like the top of the left shoulder pad, it goes up this very kind of yellowish green, light green, and then the bottom goes down to this like red black. Whereas the not freehand, whatever you call it, the transfer is just flat white the whole way around. So I'd say you probably want to put those on earlier or do something to make it just fit in a bit more. Again, depending on what level you're going for. Even something like having a few dark washes over the lower end of it would just make it stand out a little bit less, and look a little bit more like is part of the armor, as opposed to being kind of floating above it in a different lighting situation than the armor itself is. But it's a great looking piece. I really like this Dark Angel guy. I think it looks really cool. Jim?
Yes, I particularly like your comment about putting a grey streak through the hair, because I've recently done an intercessor, and I did exactly that. I gave him a great big, like a
You put gun grey.
silver fox crest along his hair on that exact head. I remember it well. I was really happy with it, actually. So yeah, great piece of advice there. Yeah, and very much as Matt said. So more edge highlights across everything. Shade or battle damage. I noticed there wasn't any battle damage anywhere else. So it's a potential opportunity. Grub, mud, slime, or whatever on the lower feet. All great things. I put a note here. Check out Travarian. I don't know if you're familiar with Travarian. It's a bit of a weird word to say, so I thought I'd type it. But he did an amazing little like pattern on the chainsaw. That's not just pure hazard stripes. It's lovely. It's really really great. And I'm stealing it shamelessly from mine. So have a look at that. That's a really good example of something that you can do just to make this a bit more interesting. Gore as well, blood. Blood for the blood god, always blood for the blood god on the blade. Not too much, but spatter here and there. All just little things to make it more interesting. But like in general, I think it's a clean paint job. I like the variety, like between the greens and browns, and like separation of stuff is pretty good. Like in these panels particularly, these are shallow as hell to paint, so you did a good job picking those out. Yeah. Oh, another cool thing you can do with marines is like try and paint the inside of these exhaust vents to make them look like they're glowing. That's cool as well. So yeah, just another little idea there, John. But in general, yeah, nice work. Thank you very much, and come next time and bring your friends. So moving up, Tiberiu. So I think we're just going to gloss over this one, Tiberiu, because we actually reviewed this last month. So we weren't sure whether you forgot and put it in again, or you put it in both because both the events were open at the same time. Not really sure. But basically, I'll just give you the brief. What I said anyway. Basically, you can vary the bone types, more volumetric highlighting on the cape, pick out your edges, and there were some notes on the gold as well. So check out last month's video, and you'll get like 5-6 minutes of talk on this. Okay, thank you very much. So I'll stick with James then. So this is another duplicate. So we were going to do this one, or should we do the later one? Because this was in twice. Do this one.
We'll just do the first one.
Okay. Okay, cool. So James Forsyth, again, duplicates won't get done twice, so we'll just do this one. Boromir diorama done, trying to experiment with stippling and texture into the paint jobs. Good texture. Very, very, very small level of detail there in the textures. Sadly, it's so difficult to do at this scale because although this is like, I can see just how magnificently tiny that tip of that brush is to do that, it still kind of looks out of scale. It's really, really hard thing to do. I think you've done a great job of getting it this tight. But some of it is just like where it's textured and where it's not is a bit abrupt sometimes. So I guess you could try and use some glazing to try and like bring it all together. Some of it stands out a little bit aggressively. I've messed up my Facebook again. Here we go. Wicked little model, isn't it? It's kind of a soft sculpt, so like it's so tiny as well. So it just looks like a nightmare to paint. In all honesty. So what else did I say? A bit more separation generally between the elements would be nice. Just like shadows in general seem to be lacking the most, I'd say. The rest of the diorama, like this is quite a zoomed in picture, so this looks like a pretty massive diorama as well. So I don't know what else is going on with it. Usually there's more than one model, not always, but like this area of space of the diorama looks enormous compared to him. So just watch out for that sometimes because it can very easily and quickly become too big for the actual model. And considering how tiny he is, just watch out for that. Next thing I had was it looks like it needs more hues in the skin. Like the highlights are blown out a bit because of the lighting of the picture a little bit. Like this one as well, like we can see harsh shadows in the lighting, like on this arrow. So that tells us straight away that you've what we're seeing in the picture isn't actually what's in your hand, so it's hard to review. But it does look a little bit monochrome in the skin. So you can Definitely push some shadows, hues like, you know, pinks in the nose, in the cheeks. You know, you can go to like blues and greys in the eyebrows. Sorry, the eyebrows, like the bags under the eyes, sort of thing. He has just been shot, so he's in shock. There's probably going to be a lot of blood rushing to his face, you know, that sort of thing. So yeah, hair. You could pick out more highlights on the hair. Certainly, you get like the halo, like around the rim of the hair. That's always there. He was in a battle as well, sweaty, slimy hair. So you could even probably go as far to like use a gloss, like a gloss varnish, but it could do with deeper shadows anyway. I think his hair was quite dark, quite a bit darker than this anyway. So you could definitely like push some darker browns in there. I like what you did with the cape. That's pretty decent, but again, just like general volumetric shading on it would be helpful. But again, it's a soft as hell sculpt, so you know, can't be too critical. Yeah, I think that was about what I had there. Oh yeah, you could do some shading on the sword and the mail as well. So the TMM elements of the figure just look like they could definitely push some shades around in there to take control of the lighting, because it just looks like one broad highlight across the top, which wouldn't really happen in real life. So yeah, hope that helps, James. Alex, we've lost your video, but hopefully you're still there.
Yes,
Excellent.
freezing up too much. That one. Yeah. Yeah. So very, very, very softly sculpted, or softly cast rather, model makes it very difficult. You almost have to paint in more to make up for that in terms of contrast and things. But then it's a very, very small model, which makes that quite difficult as well. So with models this size, it is quite tricky. But things like recess shading, very, very tight recess shading and very, very tight edge highlighting are essential. Otherwise, you don't get any separation besides the change of color, but the actual elements look like they blend into each other in places. I would say for things like this where it's so small that actually just getting your brush, just the tip of your brush even, to get into the crevice is really hard. Oil washes are the way to go with this, because they just, by the capillary action, they just sink straight into exactly where you want them, and it's just so much easier. So, you know, places like between sort of the brown and the red elements could do with definitely tidying things up there. Where you've got some of the ridges in the cloak, particularly around the front where it's wrapping around, where you've got where the hood's laying down on the cloak itself, where you've got two elements of the same color. You know, edge recess shading there more tightly, a little bit more dramatically. And sort of pushing the contrast in places. Again, the smaller the scale, the more sort of you have to kind of push things so that you get the full range of contrast across such a small area. It can be really, really tricky. And things like, you know, washing and glazing can be more useful than trying to layer things up. Sort of, but in washing, again, oil washes can be very, very helpful there to allow that level of shading without much room to put it on. You know, the details are so minute here. You know, I think the whole model is about half the size of your thumb. That's insane. To try and paint that is crazy, in all honesty. And I think for what it is, you've done a really, really good job. You know, I wouldn't want to paint a model that small at all. So really, really, really nice job for how small it is. You know, if it were a bigger model, you know, you could say things like the hair could use more reflectivity and you know, the skin could use more variation in it. But when it's that small, I think those things are almost not impossible, but are so difficult to achieve well, that it's sometimes looking at it from a more sort of base highlight shadow approach is the extent to which I think most people should sort of think about it. You know, the texture's nice, but it does look out of scale because it's so small. It makes it, obviously when you zoom in you can see that it's painted texture, but on the zoomed out photo it almost looks like it's paint surface texture, because it is so hard to paint at that scale. I think you've done a really good job for how small the model is. Yeah. So then we move up to Sharon, or Hala or Jayla. Yeah. So looking at this piece, no specific thing. So just generally looking at the overall model. I think it's quite cleanly painted. Again, use some more separation though, particularly on sort of the blue-green elements where there's not much. There's quite a lot of different panels and things, but not much separation between them. Again, things as simple as recess shading, slightly more strong edge highlighting, and those edge highlights being not just one color. You know, you can create a highlight across your edge highlights towards the edges. Something that you get to see a lot of time in Games Workshop box arts and things, where the heavy metal painters have edge highlighted and then done a second one, and then a third one even just at the very tips of the corners and things, to give that real funneling of light. I think a good way to describe the heavy metal style in general is the highlights are focused on the edges, and you accentuate the edges really heavily. So leaning into that a little bit more. I think that the skin tone is generally nice. Could be a little bit more contrast in there though, just to sort of bring the focus in. You've got a lot, as picked on the face, you've got a lot of colours going around the face, and then a relatively dull sort of desaturated tone for the actual skin tone. So bringing a bit more life into there, or a bit more colour in the eyes, or toning down some of the surrounding colours, would make it a little bit sort of more in focus. And just sort of giving it that little bit more pop, selectively chosen. It looks as though you've gone for very bright colours because they're fun to paint, but it doesn't quite line up with a strong composition necessarily, and creates a little bit of a disjointed. There's nowhere for the eye to settle on the model. Although I do quite like the blue-green transition you've got going on in the sort of panels there, on the sort of armor pieces, or sort of, and on sort of like the quiver, because it's really interesting visually, but perhaps a little bit sort of, with how bright the yellow of the hair is and things, maybe a little bit too much interest. That gives a bit too much sort of noise in the signal. But you know, really nice and clean. Just a little bit of tidying up in that recess shading. Matt?
Yeah, I think it's a cool looking model. I really like the blue and the green and the blue green. I think it's a really cool, naturalistic, kind of fantasy looking color scheme. Yellow hair could be a bit like, it's very yellow, but she's an elf, so maybe like, you know, they have yellow hair as opposed to blonde hair. I think on the eyes, you looks like you've gone for that kind of D&D fourth edition. Elves have just solid color eyes, but you should do a dot of white if at all possible, just to show there's light reflecting off them, and that'll also give us much more the feeling of there being a pupil in the eye, because when you have an eye that's just a solid color, it doesn't look like an eye. Like, an eye has to have more than one circle in it, otherwise you just register it as being kind of something else. And then a couple of minor just finishing points. You should probably look into maybe putting a bit of a wash and a dry brush into these grass tufts. That'll make them look a lot better, make them sit down a little bit more, and then just paint the black rim of the base. But it's great work. Keep it up. Thanks a million for submitting. Okay, we've got Gareth Gorman here. Bill Noir diorama. Everything is scratched built, and he sculpted all three figures himself. This is really cool. We don't often see like sculpted stuff to anything like this extent, and I'm not a sculptor, so I won't have too much to say on that. I think the diorama is great. I think the lighting is really cool. We've got this contrasting two different light sources, and we immediately understand the scene from without having to be told. Like, there's these mobsters, they're ransacking this office. Someone is coming up to the door, and this fella's pulling out his pistol to kind of deal with whatever is going to go down now afterwards. So, like, I think it's, in terms of dioramas, that's brilliant, because like, it's telling a whole story visually, and I think we immediately would get it. Couple of little kind of technical pointers, maybe. I think the door frame has a couple of gaps on the frame itself and in the skirting board, or whatever you call it, around the door. especially down at the bottom right. In scale, like you'd be able to put your whole hand under there. So I think you could probably just block that in with something that's kind of obvious because the light is coming through. Obviously, light does go under door frames, like they don't fit like perfectly flush. But just in terms of like how big, if that was 50 times bigger, think of you wouldn't have it wouldn't look very professional in terms of how your house was put together. Um, and I think the picture frames are all very level. There's one picture that's down the ground, but it seems like if they're tearing up the place, like one of them maybe should have been knocked crooked. That was just something in the composition that jumped out at me. It's not necessary, but it's just kind of an idea for yourself. I'd like that you did the freehand on all the picture frames as well. That's great. And the main guy on the sculpt, his legs are a bit angular looking. Like it's probably to do with the light as well. But he has these pressed trousers, but like it almost looks like his legs are like diamond cross sections. So you could maybe kind of soften that out a bit more in the sculpting process, or if that was what you were going for, that's fine. It's really, really cool. It's great to see like a scratch built there on it like this with like the lights and everything put in there. So thanks a million for submitting. Hope to see more in the future. I hope that was helpful to you. Jim?
Yeah, thoroughly impressed with all of this. Really, really good. I did also notice that the door frame seems to be a little bit. I mean, I kind of work in construction, and I see a lot of these stuff going on, and like, yeah, the gaps in the architrave around the door are pretty huge. So I don't know if it's supposed to, and like I wasn't sure what this like tape sticker thing bit is at the bottom of the door either. I just didn't know what it was. But maybe if there's a story there, then it would make more sense. But it's like, why is this? What is this? But like the setting, like the whole idea of it is so different and so well executed that it becomes a minor thing. What Matt said about just like twisting a picture frame or two is a really good shout, I think. And then I wasn't sure if like these were like shadows from the lighting, like from taking the picture, or from actually being cast shadows that you've painted on. I think it's probably the former. So just watch out when you do photos and stuff. Make sure you haven't got such a direct light that you're casting shadows onto your own piece, because it doesn't really tell the full story of what's there. But because you said this is film noir and everything's supposed to be moody and gloomy, and you've used fantastic colours for it as well, but it's still dotting some different colours around within the colour wheel really, really nicely. So I think you did a great job overall, Gareth, and the fact that you sculpted everything yourself is wonderful. So great job, nice one. Keep it coming. Okay, moving up to Jim Kearney. Post-apocalyptic fun, is it? Okay, I thought the post-apocalyptic was not fun, but you obviously had fun with this. Just wanted the painting on the bust to try and reflect the wider decline of the world. And the backdrop that you've used. I think those two elements of the story pass off together absolutely fine. No problem at all. Deeply grotty, like distressed, almost like nurgly, like with how much like corrosion and rot is going on here. It does look very dry though. I mean, it's very well matted down, obviously deliberately. But what I mean by dry is it looks like very dry rot. There's not like a lot of streaking going on with like water's collected and then it's like overspilled, like on top of these armor plates here. Like it would collect to a certain point where there's like a dent or a dip in it or something, and then you get like a bit of streaking going down. So that was the main element of like the corrosion that really stood out as like missing. It would also happen around like rivets and stuff. The rivets are really clean. So yeah, just an idea there, like just take the weathering a step further. You could also like go in with sharper, finer, like micro hashing, like for the leather textures, just to really help sell that. I think leather always sells better when it's got a slightly distressed look to it. The metals do seem very, very dull. And by what that I mean is it hasn't got like any like really, really specular highlights to it. So although it's very corroded, that's fine. But to bring a little bit more value to it, you can still go in and sort of stipple very small areas where it hasn't gone completely to ruin, or where it's been like it's rubbed off on the edges, like where he moves his shoulder, like it would move and it would rub and it would actually brighten that up again. Not like to a highly polished sheen, but like compared to the rest of the metal, it would still shine very brightly. So you could just go in and just pick out a few elements, really easy, really quick. Just go in with a high silver and just pick out random bits. And anywhere, like I said, where it'd be like rubbing or something. The buckles on the straps also looks really dull compared to the rest of it, and like I think you could just push the contrast on those a bit further, just to up those. I love what you did with the green eyes though; those are looking absolutely super. It almost looks like he's got like a heavenward gaze. We're like, oh, for God's sake, another one. Do you know what I mean? Although it's like a specular highlight, we can't really tell where he's looking. It kind of gives it that feel, that mood, which I think like fits the background really nicely. You could what else did I have? I think I said something about shadows. Yeah, so like you can tell from this photo here that like I think there should be more shadows on it. Everything else in the background is like really shadowed, but he seems very, very well lit. So going forward, you could push some shadows in like some deeper recessed areas, just to really show off the lighting a little bit more. Both of these backdrops work just fine, by the way. I think he looks at home in both of them. So that's cool. And then the last thing was the sword. It doesn't look like there's actually a picture this one, so it is kind of there. I didn't see this picture before, if I'm honest. It just looked like from the other pictures that the sword was really like dull and there was nothing going on with it, but I guess I flipped past this one and didn't see that. But no, that blade actually looks quite good. Again, what I said about like the high silver, you've got a bit of that going on the blade, and that looks loads better. So yeah, point in case. Fantastic work on this distressed wood here as well, by the way. That's really like A plus for me. It looks gorgeous. Love distressed wooden painting. So yeah, brilliant job with that bit. Yeah, congrats. Nice one, Jim. Alex?
Yeah, so again, I really like what you've got going on with the weathering. I think that it's really successful at creating that post-apocalyptic vibe, that sort of very distressed, very worn. I think that the sort of greenish armor plates are more nicely achieved in terms of variation. It feels like in some of the other metals you've gone for more or less one tone for the rust. Obviously, rust is loads of different colors depending on the age and level. Like Jim was saying, streaking is one way to introduce brighter, sort of slightly more nuanced colors in there. So you can have a base layer of quite dark, very old, very heavily oxidized and worn rust, and then streaks of lighter rust on there. But on the green, you've got quite a lot of variation. You've got some blues, you've got some more sort of almost limey greens in there, some oranges. That's really nice. I think that the separation of some of the panels could be stronger again, as is often the case. A bit more recess shading and a bit more edge highlighting can really pop things out, help with the contrast, which I think could be a little bit higher, even still within that sort of not that quite dirty and worn style. You can get away with that just to help define some of the volumes a bit better. Like Jim said, I think that the worn wood sort of effect is really successful. Really successful. I think you could get away with the colours potentially being a little bit more desaturated on the wood itself, a bit greyed out to make it look older. It looks like it's sort of covered in algae and that sort of bloom as well. So it could also go a darker colour to show that it's sort of a little bit wet. The whole vibe I'm getting from this is kind of post-apocalyptic. What's the sort of underwater kind of guy? Diver. That's what I'm after. In the sort of like those old diving bell type helmets. And sort of that kind of vibe, and I find that, to be honest, it reminds me of the diver from the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, but in a good way. Again, like Jim said, I really like the eyes and sort of that lens effect you've got going there. I do think it might be almost too bright for what you've got going with the rest of it. I could see this sort of figure having a bit of a sort of you know, dirty, kind of mucky, dusty, greasy, whatever lenses, because of how worn the rest of them is. So just having that be that little bit more toned down, it does really help to draw the focus up. So I really appreciate it for that. But it's almost too focus drawing because it's so bright compared to the rest of the model. It feels almost out of place. It's you know it's kind of like Space Marine lenses on rusty diver man from the post-apocalyptic future. You know, it doesn't quite line up to my expectation based on the rest of the model. Your mileage may vary, and other people will have very different thoughts on that. But overall, I think it's a really, really successful sort of attempt at what you're going for. It really, really hits on all of those sort of grungy, dark, grimy kind of vibes. So really well done on that. Moving up to Emmanuel. First attempt at NMM Gold and looking at advice on that specifically. So yeah, on the gold, I think that you've got the right kind of color palette going on for like a cold gold, which would work well with that sort of the color scheme you've got, that sort of more antique sort of green in the shadows kind of gold. In terms of the tones there, your contrast is there in terms of you go all the way to white and you go all the way to black, but the spread of the contrast is and the balance of the highlights and shadows is off, and that's what's making it not quite read as metal. So take the sort of design on the chest there, which you know you've got these really, really bright, essentially white dots on all the edges, a little bit, all the tips, sorry, of these sort of feathery elements on the design. You've got a little bit of that yellow tone, sort of ochre tone, and then the rest of the whole thing is pretty much black and in shadow, and that doesn't make it look like metal. If it's gold, a lot of the color needs to be some sort of mid-tony shade. To make it read that way, and sort of having the areas of maximum highlight being a bit wider as well. You know, unless you're going for it, a very, very, very super dirty gold, you wouldn't have. You need more sort of highlight there, and you wouldn't have, and you need more of that sort of mid tone coming through to tell you that it is gold. I think that, as I say, the amount of contrast is fine. I think the best element for me for that is actually the little on that same central element, the little skull in the middle, because you've got quite a lot of that gold color there, rather than just being mostly black like the wings are. And you've got a nicely placed sort of little specular highlight on there, so that reads quite nicely. And if the rest of the model were in that sort of the rest of the gold were in that sort of balance of tones, balance of, you know, your 1 to 5s, having a lot in that sort of 3 range gives it the color to look gold. And if everything else were in that sort of same balance of highlight, mid-tone, shadow, it would read quite strongly as a gold rather than just sort of not quite metallic. On other elements, I think that again, cleanly painted, could have a little bit more sort of in terms of, again, it's the same as with the gold. Say take the knee pads and the legs, for example. You've got pretty much all black, and then really, really focused sort of spot highlights, specular highlights, and some edge highlighting. So it reads very flat. You know, your volumetric highlighting needs to be a bit stronger to create the volume there, and give it a little bit more visual interest. But again, clean, smooth. Just the contrast is there, but the balance of where on that sliding scale it is not quite there to give it that volumetric look and that metallic look. I would sort of, if you've seen any of the, any of the Miniac videos where he has his little card with the pink and the white, explain that concept probably a little bit easier than and clearer than I just have. I think his most recent videos explain that quite well. Has a little segment on that, so I'd recommend going and looking at that. And yeah, I think moving in the right direction in terms of the colors and palettes, just spreading your value range a little bit more widely. Matt?
Yeah, I think it's a really good looking piece. It's great for, did you say it was your first trial of NMM? So like it's still really good. Definitely agree with Alex. The best piece overall is the central skull in the chest. That kind of Aquila thing, it's really hard to get to look right. There aren't many examples of it that I super like, to be honest with you, because it's got so many like different planes in it. So like don't beat yourself up over that. I thought it was a little bit odd as well, though, that like I think your spot highlights look really good and really convincing, but you're showing that the light is coming from a fairly steep angle. But then, say the two wings on his chest and on that thing behind his head, they're highlighted like almost completely symmetrically. But you're telling us the light is more from over here. So why are both the wings kind of the same? Then that would suggest the light's coming from in front of him, and that might be one of the things that's kind of not helping. Also, with NMM, you kind of have to get everything right often to get anything right, if that makes sense. If there's anything a little bit off, our brain kind of picks it up and goes like, "Oh, that's not, it's breaking the illusion." And this like halo thing around his head is a horrible shape to try to kind of have to try and paint. A ring is fine. You do like a light that goes like splits across it, but the fact that it's just got rivets on it and it's got spikes sticking out of it, you're like, that's just GW being bored and adding more details that make it harder for you to paint. So, yeah, I would have just cut them all off. And also the death mask thing. There's no it's white, obviously, it looks cool, but there's no spot highlight on it. Like if it's like ivory or whatever, it'll have a spot highlight in the exact same place. And I think that'd really set off the piece. Also, paint your tufts. This is far too high end piece of painting to have just a random piece of like he's standing on the moon with a piece of grass that just exists there. So just a bit of wash and a dry brush make it look much better. And keep up the work in the NMM. You're definitely going in the right direction. Okay, Stu Milne. Most elaborate, ambitious project to date. It's a big Titan thing. Very cool. Very impressive. It's got a definite John Blanche feel to it with the choice of colors and the way all the freehands that you've done on it. Freehand script, iconography. It's got like the history of Warhammer in it. It's got the Emperor meeting with the Omnisire or whatever, and like all the little 101s all over it. So I think it's really really cool. And yeah, you'd be very proud of it. So I won't go into too much detail. Like it's such a big piece, I'm not going to talk about like too much about individual bits and bobs. But just some general things that I kind of thought jumped out to me were the way your freehand interacts with the with sculpted details is a bit weird to my eye. Like so, for example, if we look at where the Emperor is slaying this dragon on like one of the shoulder pads, there's like a fleur de lis or some metal thing that's added on to the shoulder pad to like it's a sculpted element and you've kind of painted over it. But like if you were the person on Mars building this thing, would you have sculpted on an additional embellishment that is only going to be painted over? Or would you have like masked it off while you painted or whatever? Like I again would have just cut that all off to have more room for the freehand. I think it works okay, and the one with the Sistine Chapel thing with the machine hand and the human hand because it's kind of hidden away into the background. But it's just like either like it's kind of like there's two things happening there. Like obviously it looks like it was put together like standard Titan and then painted over. But like it seems like the people doing it would have maybe avoided painting over it or maybe have modified it in some other way. Um, that's just again for future things. Like it's not a big deal. Also, you can have some more wear on certain elements, like the handles. He's got like a ladder on him. Seems like again that's been painted with freehand. Seems like that'd wear off like straight away, or like maybe they'd leave the freehand off because they know that people are going to be climbing up and down there. It's only going to be rubbed off, unless it's some sort of future space paint that is impervious to harm. Like that'd be fine too. Um, and in general, you could have more kind of chipping and like bits that are flaked off and things. He looks like because it's all very grimdark and it's meant to be kind of this worn, damaged future. Obviously, he's a very well maintained or well thought of machine, but like it's still a war machine. You've got like kind of grime in some places, like from like machine smoke or oil or whatever, but there doesn't look like there's bits where like paint has rubbed off the edges as the machine moves around, which would totally happen, or like like on his feet where it's like chipped up or whatever. There's no kind of mechanical wear, if that makes sense. And like obviously whenever you do a lot of freehand on something, it feels like it's gonna break your heart to like put some bullet holes in that or whatever. But actually it just makes it look like 10 times better because it gives us that extra, breaks up the kind of the freehand, and it gives us that idea that it's actually physically there and part of the universe, as opposed to it being like this is a miniature and it has painting over it, if that makes sense. Like if you had a tank that was painted when it came out of the factory, if it's been in the field at all, it's going to have all sorts of like chips taken out of it, and it's going to go through the paint, the free-handed paint and the normal paint, and like that'll kind of show us that it's kind of like really there, if that makes sense. But it's a great looking piece. Like I don't know how many hours you put into this, but you should be very happy with it. I think. Jim.
Yeah, can't fault it at all for effort, can you? Really, the amount that's gone into this is magnanimous. So, congratulations on finishing it to start with. Yeah, besides what Matt said, not really much else. Just looks like you could maybe next time push like the general like volumetric shading on the whole thing. Everything seems to be very uniformly lit. There's also like an issue with glossiness on some of it. Like not horribly glossy, but it's like you could certainly do with a bit more matting down. So like this picture shows it particularly, like you get these like reflections, like where you've deliberately painted shadows, which breaks the illusion of the lighting straight away. So yeah, that's kind of a more easy fix, just bashing it with some ultramat. But yeah, in general, very impressed with it. Like I'm not really a huge fan of doing large free-handed things, especially not one of these bad boys. So yeah, freehand rules, fill the space, vary color scheme, palette, and I think you've done a super job with all of it. So yeah, nice to see some battle damage as Matt said, and just mat it down a little bit in places. And yeah, you got something really special here, Stu. Very very impressive, nice one. Moving up then. To what I think is going to be the last one of this week. So everyone else will be done in the coming days or next week. Next time we can get together. So last one for today is Kevin with his first bust, challenging myself with this piece by adding OSL and using the airbrush. So let's have a look. Once Facebook decides to work, there we go. So I like the general theme of this, like Cap's gone bad, and I think you've done a really nice job of making him look ghouly, gory, and bad. Like with the armor splitting open and showing like the green pustular stuff beneath, like the way you've like rendered the skin and like having manky teeth and the gore, all really, really working. A lot of this texture is sculpted on, I'm fairly certain. So you've done a good job of picking it out, but I do think you could go further in like volumetrically highlighting it. There's a lot of potential here for like shadow contrast, like bringing these areas down, like under here. A little bit's happening naturally with your light, so you could really exaggerate that. And like I know it would be long, very very long, but like picking out these edges of the these like fish scale plates on the armor would be really really nice, because the blue, although you've added like interest with it with like the blood, and it's like some is more fresh than others, and I think you did a really good job of that. I just think in general the blue could be pushed in terms of highlights and shadows. It looks like you did a bit better work on the star, like some of the, again I'm not sure if this is like the lighting from the photo, but like some of these areas do look darker than others. So that looks cool. For the leather, I think again could do with more shading and like separating the elements, like where the strap meets the shoulder, like the brown meets the blue. There needs to be a very deliberate dark matte line through there, and same around the buckles. Like there's a tiny bit of silver like overspilling. I mean, it's harsh, it's critical, but like zooming in and it's like, oh god. But like this is a bust, and in this scale, like if you don't pick these things out and render them properly, then straight away, because it's so big, our eyes are like, whoa, there's an imperfection. So like it is hard to do busts, and for a first bust, I think you said first bust, right? Did you say first bust? Yes, he did. So like it is a completely different game to painting the small ones. Like in a lot of ways it's harder, because you would think, oh, all the details are there, all the textures are there, that's easier. But in many ways you have to go further, because you then got to pick out all this stuff individually, where like usually whacking like dry brushes and washes and oils and stuff is going to do the work for you. When you get to this level and really push busts, like where you are with this one, and to be like maxing it out, you'd probably have to double, if not triple, the amount of time that went into this. It's really long. It's a hard thing to get into. It is a mental challenge as well as a physical one. So yeah, for a first bust, it's pretty damn good. I have to say, there's a lot of things going right with it, but you really have to push them. Then for the OSL on the eyes, not really selling terribly well. Nice use of the airbrush. It's gone on like smooth, and it's good control. You can clearly see that, but you wouldn't be seeing any green above this eyebrow, because his eyes are so sunk in there. That's going to hit this inside edge here, but then nothing is going to get above this, nothing at all, because the light's coming out this way. So if anything, this would be more shadowed. So speaking of shadows, where you've got the green like cast light meeting the blue, there needs to be like a dark shadow line here. So wherever your darkest shadow is on this blue like this, you need to blend from the green into this blue, and then from this blue into the lighter blue. There has to be that cast shadow between the two. This is why it just looks washed out and it's not really selling. Again, OSL is as much about painting the shadows as it is about painting the lights, because you can't have bright light source without creating shadows, and this model isn't doing it for you, like where the light source is coming from. That being said, also you need to have the green like a lot brighter, so you need to push like whites into the greens. You could either do it like, well, I'd probably suggest doing like right in the center, like having the center of the eye. It'd give it a little bit more, not life, but like more like life-like, because it's just like a flat green at the minute. Although you're not going to go painting pupils in it, if you were to bring the light to like a concentrated bright point right in the middle, I think it would help bring an element of that to it. And then the cast glow obviously needs to be darker than, well, it would be anyway, but if you're pushing it up to like a near white, it would make it really pop. The smaller the white area in the OSL, the better it sells. But again, you've got to put these shadows in as well. Otherwise, it just looks like it's just airbrush blast. Done. Thank you. And in reality, you've just got to go a bit further. But it's on the right track. Like the skill with the airbrush is there. So it's just a case of pushing some white into it and putting the shadows in, as you said. And yeah, it'll be a really strong place. So yeah, I hope that helps, Kevin. Alex?
Yeah. So yeah, just sticking on the OSL. You often hear people talking about being able to tell when people have done OSL with an airbrush over a brush. I think that's not necessarily true. I think if airbrush OSL is done well, it's, I think sometimes people use that as an excuse to, be a bit high and mighty. Oh, I did this with a brush, sort of thing. So I don't think that's a real thing. But you in cases like this is what I mean when I say you can tell that's done with an airbrush. Is you've pointed the airbrush, you've gone brrr, and left it at that. So like Jim was saying, just popping it out, you can do multiple passes with the airbrush. We can see that you can apply smoothly with that, and you can use the tool well. It is just another tool. It is just another form of brush. So a wider area, then a lighter one, going in, possibly painting. If you can show here that you can use the airbrush really precisely, doing a small even airbrush transition of a like a mid-tone grey to a white with, or even a sort of a reddish brown to a white in the eye itself, that transition, so you've got that desaturation towards the edge when you apply the green over it, almost sort of across the eyeball itself, and then when you then apply your airbrush green, you have that little pop of perfect white in the middle already. It makes it an extra, brush paint a little bit of brown in the eyes, a bit of a reddish sort of, almost like a Doombril brown in the eye on the eyeball itself. Then that's not very long. A little of white airbrushed into the middle, get a nice transition. That's not very long, and then your green over that is going to just make that for an extra maybe 3 minutes of brush time with your airbrush cleaning time between your blasts. A little bit longer than that, but for an extra total 10-15 minutes of work, you could make that look stunning. That's not to that's just a knowledge of how to use the tool in its most effective way and its most efficient way. And that's something that, if you're saying you're still sort of learning about using the airbrush and learning about doing bust painting and the extra detail about that, a first bust, with a small sort of 70, even a 75mm model, but 28mm model, you can kind of get away with a little boop of color to give it an OSL. If it's just the eyes, I think the color and the actual look of the glow it's so bright that it pulls the attention up. So whereas it would be nice to have more contrast across the model, you can almost kind of get away with it because you're not looking at the rest of the model. You snap straight into those eyes. We do need more contrast across it to create the actual. Once you do look away from the eyes, when you can pull your gaze away from them, you do notice it. So it is needed, but it can be quite subtle. It doesn't need to be extreme at all. You can almost sort of vignette it so that it's just fading down to not much contrast at all. It's shadow-wise towards the bottom of the chest and just bringing, actually volumetrically highlighting only really the top and the face. So you don't need to do the whole hog and do the whole thing. I'm a big fan of vignetting your attention away from the outer edges to bring things in. But yeah, that can be with that can be really, really, really nicely done OSL with not too much more work. As it stands, it sells ish, but could sell significantly better. Like Jim was saying, you need to paint in some shadows as well to give it that real effect, and that bright point needs to be there. At the moment, it's one color covering the whole area. In terms of the rest of the figure, I think that your cleanliness is generally quite good. There's a few areas of overpaint though that can be tidied up with a recessed shade, or just going back and painting back in. So for example, the leather straps, you can see where some of the brown is starting to slightly leach over onto the blue in a few places. The teeth is lower teeth. You can see where some of that yellow color is onto the gums, or what's left of the gums. Extra details on the teeth, extra details on busts and larger scales like this. You can get away with some small striations on the teeth. I know humans don't have that pronounced striation like you would on the horn, but it is there. We do have textured teeth as well, and you would be able to pick that out just towards the edges even on this scale. So it is just the sort of things that you build over time with busts. There's nothing wrong with not having those full details in there with your very first one. For a first bust, it's nice. It pulls attention in the right way, and it creates a story in the right way, which is half the battle. And then, like Jim said, for a bust, the second half of the battle is spending way more time than you think you're going to need to spend. Busts are endurance marathons more so than sprints, and it is a good rule that I stick with is when you think you finish your bust, you've probably got another 60% to go of small details and refining. And that's all this piece needs, is that sort of refining stuff, which does take most of the time with bust painting. Unfortunately, it's the nature of the beast until you're at a level way above I think most people, where you can just knock it out really, really easily, and that's something that I'm nowhere near. I can't knock out a bust. They take me weeks of multiple painting sessions. So there's nothing wrong with it having to take the time. I think with bust painting, it's about not setting a time limit on yourself. It's about setting a level of detail that you want to achieve, and spending the time necessary to do that. And that's something that you build over time. First bust might, you might feel fatigued after however many hours, however long you spent on this might make you feel, oh, that was a long time. Then the next one, you can do that same amount of time and get a little bit more detail, or you can decide to spend a little bit more time because you've dipped your toe into it, you want to do a bit more and get a bit more detailing in and sort of build up like that. And rather than trying to do it all in one, build little bits every time you paint one. And I think that's just good advice in general: is never push yourself to do everything on one project. But yeah, it's a really nice sort of dipping your toe into the world of bust painting, and I hope we see more of them in the future.
Cool. Well, I'll just about one little note there, Kevin. I would probably paint the bits where his shoulder is like cut off in black rather than leaving it grey. It's just it's like, hey, you paint the rim of your base black. I think it's generally the convention with busts, because it's just showing us that like it doesn't exist from here down. Like, so rather than have it the same color as the plinth or whatever. But yeah, great work. So that's gonna be our last one for today. We're going to hopefully get the rest of these put out in next week or at some stage in the near future. It was great to see so many entries, but we don't want to have the videos get like preposterously long. So if your video didn't show up in this video, or if your submission didn't show up in this video, it will be up in our next video. We hope to see you for that one, and happy painting.